All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the longest running show in the world about data. It's called DM Radio. Yours truly, Eric Kavanaugh here, and we're going to focus on pretty hot topic today, folks. The exact title is Future Proof Your Enterprise with Automation and AI. And I'm very pleased to have Michael Kravec with us. He is one of the founders of a company called Blue Yeti. Not the cooler folks. No, this is a consultancy focused on the snowflake market. And we're going to talk about the nexus of these technologies and how it is absolutely revolutionizing how business gets done. Usually in good ways. If you do it wrong, obviously it can have some negative impact. But I will say that Gen AI clearly opened boardrooms, minds all around the country and around the world. AI is not new. We've had artificial intelligence for decades, quite frankly. In fact, there were a couple AI winters that have been talked about when there was a huge hype cycle. And then, like Gartner says, there's this trough of disillusionment. That was the AI winter and went on for years, where we'd just gotten upset and sad that it wasn't working out the way we thought. Well, those days are gone. I don't think there are going to be any more AI winters. Now, there will be AI shortcomings. There will be AI issues to deal with. We'll talk about a lot of that. But this nexus of AI and automation, that's the key for changing how your business gets done and really optimizing workflows. That's what it really boils down to is getting things done faster, more efficiently, improving the quality, lowering the error rates, and getting things done for your clients. So with that, Michael, welcome to DM Radio. Maybe first tell us real quick about Blue Yeti, what you folks are working on over
Mhm.
there, and let's dive into how to leverage the nexus of AI and automation.
Sure, Eric. Thank you very much for having me. So at Blue Yeti, what we do is we're a center of excellence that focuses on not only the Snowflake ecosystem, so really the modern data stack or whatever we're calling it these days, but also we focus on agentic AI bots as well. We try to do that all within the Snowflake ecosystem, or I should say within Snowflake in and of itself. So if you've noticed in Snowflake recently, they're bringing more and more compute capabilities into their platform, and we're trying to leverage them as they come in and as they come live.
Hmm. Yeah, and one of my theories about where this industry is going and where the power of AI will be leveraged and used is that centers of gravity will be crucial. So look around. Who's talking about agentic AI right now? Well, Salesforce with Agent Force, they are a center of gravity, and they have a really powerful engine because they're sitting on top of your sales data. All that sales data, that's pretty important stuff to be able to sell. So they're very strong in this space right now. Snowflake, Databricks. There's a few others, but really, I think these centers of gravity are going to be crucial for lots of reasons. One, because it takes time and effort to design these models, to deploy them, to manage them, to understand them. And you don't want to be doing it out on the fringe of your enterprise. You want to have it at some beating heart, if you will, of data. And that's certainly what Snowflake is, right?
Oh, absolutely. And also, to add to that, I'd also say by piecing together different components to really build it yourself is a challenging way to go for the first version of your AI journey.
Hmm.
Oftentimes, and all of us at Blue Yeti were a huge fan of Sol Rashidi's AI survival guidebook, which goes through in detail, very practical book as far as um, not only determining the team, but also the AI strategy, which really goes beyond figuring out what the use case is. And I'll give you a quick example. There's a range of AI use cases that you can have in your strategy. Some of them are efficiency based, so you're just trying to get things done faster, and maybe you're um, sacrificing quality a little bit.
Mm.
And you're going to go all the way up to growth-based strategies where the agentic AI is doing a lot of things, determining, making decisions, potentially figuring out where you're going to invest your time, resources, or money uh, to move the business forward.
Hmm. And agentic AI, I mean, it's interesting that so large language models come around,
Mhm.
took the world by storm. It's just one flavor of AI, and it's very interesting. I point out to people that they are probabilistic. So one of my favorite lines to ask is when you consider the fact that most of these Gen AI engines get an accuracy rate around 80%, classic Pareto principle,
Mhm.
well, what part of your business can be wrong 20% of the time? The answer is not much.
Right.
Operations, fulfillment, accounting, no,
Hmm.
that has to be correct. So Gen AI is good for certain things. It is not good for certain other things. They're also very unstable. So I've worked with some folks. In fact, my good buddy Eve Mulkers from 7W Data, he's been really digging in and learning about these large language models, working them into workflows for doing all kinds of interesting things. And he says this again and again that they forget things, they break down, they if you give them the authority to change things, they will, and they don't always change things properly. So you have to kind of contain them in a certain way. This is guardrails, and you've
Hmm.
talked about data governance a lot as being crucial for all this. So that's Gen AI. That's one thing, but automation and all these other kinds of AI are separate entities. And smaller models can be trained to be much more accurate because let's face it, 80% accuracy is not very good. Even with really good RAG models, retrieval augmented generation,
Hmm.
that's what everybody's working on, these RAG models. Okay, you get up to 90%. You still need a human in the loop watching these things. So let's tackle the Gen AI stuff first, then we go into the AI
Hmm.
agents. With Gen AI, you really have to be careful about where you deploy this. And I think still most of the use cases are internally focused. What do you think?
Um, I agree with you. I believe so. Uh, and I think there's two reasons why there's mainly internally focused. And first is the accuracy, but I
Hmm.
think that's improving dramatically. The second one I think is cost.
Mm.
So, and it's very much like the analytics wave of what, 10 years ago when people were creating dashboards, they did it internally. And then all of a sudden there was need for people to, or I should say for enterprises to give analytics out to their partners, to their customers, to whomever. And that was the value add. I'm going to see a similar, I expect a similar trend with AI.
Mm.
Um, Now, as far as the accuracy part, that's where scoping is very important. And I'll give you a quick example there. We've created some AI agents, and let's take the agentic part and put it aside for now. Uh, we did that for Telium, which is a CDP.
Hmm. I know those
And
guys, yeah.
yeah, so instead of having one agent doing everything, we actually had to split it up into three. And this was the example that we had, and it can be done a couple of different ways. We have Talia, who's our agent that does marketing. She's a marketing expert. So you can
Hmm.
just ask plain generic marketing questions. Talia will come back with an answer, and maybe you want to see what's happening within your data. So then you can go to Elium, who is the Snowflake or your data expert. And um, Elium knows the data dictionary, it can give you answers, give you queries, give you charts. Then the next one is Lumio, which is the Telium expert. And that Lumio knows how to configure and knows all the functionality of Telium. They're all accessible through Slack or Teams. And in fact, you can even have them all in a group chat together and start talking to them and go back and forth, and they're kind of bouncing off of each other, and it works really well. Um, the first question is always, why not just one bot?
Hmm.
And I think that's where the confusion, the lack of accuracy comes in because there's way too much context. The scope of context is too broad for
Right,
these models to respond appropriately. So
right.
what we've learned is how to hone in on certain specialties, very much like you would have a team. So the human analogy just is an extension. The AI workforce is an extension of the human workforce in that case.
Yeah, it's intelligent automation, or it's mostly intelligent, um, almost fully autonomous automation, right?
Hmm.
When you get
Yes.
right down to it, you still want guardrails. You still want to be able to train it. But I've
Yes.
heard this now time and again. This company Verint, you may know Dan
Hmm.
Bodner,
Yes.
their CEO. He was on the show last year, and he was saying what you just said. Because I asked him that very same question: Are you trying to train these bots to do different things? He goes, No, actually, we've learned you want to get your bots focused on doing one thing very well, and then
Hmm.
you have some sort of orchestration layer, which could be a human, it could be another bot that is charged with getting an accomplishment done, and it relies on the individual bots to do certain things like capture data, analyze the data, populate the data somewhere else, for example. So you have these bots, and they're I describe them as semi-autonomous mini apps. Is that how
Hmm.
you would describe them?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we're still focusing on the agentic terminology these days because that is the hot thing.
Right.
And it's actually gotten to a point where they're each of them have a little bit of a personality. And we even have one we did for
That's
someone
too
who is doing
funny.
supply chain. And this is Max, who's a port operations AI agent, and we just taught him how to talk like a pirate. So he goes
No
and
way.
he does he does all your service tickets and everything, but he responds as a pirate. Um, and that's the funny example, but the realistic example, especially with international teams, we have the same bot, and you ask it a question in any language, and it will respond in the language that it was trained on. You say, I'm sorry, I don't understand Portuguese. Can you put it in English or could you
Right.
put it in Chinese? And it just works perfectly.
That's
So,
amazing.
so just the ability to do that is, I think, is an incredible way for collaboration.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, it's just it's amazing. We talked on a show last week about the summarization capacity of these large language models, which I think is probably the golden ticket. I think they do that extremely well.
Yes.
And just, I mean, look, think about all like Read AI is what I use. There's Otter Notes. There's a whole bunch of them. Zoom has its own
Mhm.
functionality now. So you see across the board, enterprise technology companies are baking this into the workflows to leverage this capacity to do real time transcripts, for example, and
Exactly.
to summarize things. So when you get, after the meeting is done, you get this email that says, okay, in this meeting, Jim said this, Bob said that. And you're like, what? Like,
Yeah,
I don't
we
have
were
to take all
doing.
these notes anymore. It's just crazy.
Yeah, we're leaning on that one pretty heavily at Blue Yeti because when you get the notes with the takeaways, instead of spending 20 minutes racking your brain what the takeaways and next steps were, that turns
Right,
into a quick email where you cut and paste. You need to make sure that you are the final editor of the document,
right.
but it just turns 20 minutes into 2 minutes, which is
Yeah.
just fantastic.
Yeah,
And
it really it's also a source of information. It's a system of record.
Mhm,
Now, to your point, you want to make sure that if it's your meeting and you're in
mhm,
charge, you go through and read all that stuff and make sure it's accurate because it will miss things. And it will always miss things. And of course, people miss things too, right? We shouldn't expect
correct.
these to be 100% correct, but we got to
Mhm,
get it to like 80% or over. And that's where a lot of this emphasis has been placed on RAG models. And that's a good segue to data and data management,
mhm.
unstructured data, because that's the, I think the big boon here is that the analytics world, which is my space, I've been in this world for 20 plus years, is all about structured data. So pulling data into a data warehouse like Snowflake, being able to
Sure.
analyze that, crunch the numbers, and then make some decision. Well, now we can leverage that corpus of unstructured data, which is at least 80% of enterprise data. And that's where all the context is. That's what's so
Yes.
important is that the context for your business is in the emails, it's in the policy documents, it's in the PDFs, it's in all of these unstructured data pieces that hitherto have been basically impossible to wrangle and to manage, right?
Mhm. Exactly. I mean, you can take that and any kind of task that requires a bit of cognition, a bit of context or conclusion, but it's a big grind. Say you
Hmm.
wanted to make sure that several dozen of your partner contracts didn't have, which have outliers. That's
Right.
something that LLMs do incredibly well.
Hmm.
But I think it also flips the script or the order of operations when it comes to how the analytic cycle goes, where now you're bringing context in the beginning because you need to cue the LLM as far as what unstructured data to pay attention to, what the question is about, and then it can go about doing the analysis on the structured data.
Hmm.
I'm quite sure there's use cases where that is not as simply stated and it's a lot more nuanced. But generally that unstructured data is providing all of the context that you're going to be analyzing your data based upon. And you're not standing in front of a dashboard, clicking, filtering, drill through, and all the stuff that the past 2 decades were about. Self-service analytics is
Right.
that's turned into something that's going to get completely scrunched and
I think so too. I mean, when I look at what's happening here, I think to myself, the standalone analytics software as a service enterprise model is toast. I mean, you're seeing, for example, Alteryx has magic documents. One of the best early use cases I've seen for leveraging large language models because they see, I guarantee they see what I'm seeing. It's like, uh-oh, like, our
Hmm.
whole business model is hanging in the balance now, especially if companies can solve for that accuracy challenge. Now,
Hmm.
until you can solve for that, you got yourself a bit of a problem. And I do think that we're never going to get rid of traditional databases, certainly not with these AI engines, because again, they're probabilistic, they're lossy, and you can't lose certain facts. That the facts of your business are going to be in your ERP, they're going to
Hmm.
be, in your CRM perhaps, reflected in your data warehouse, but being able to synthesize all that, that's where we just, I mean, made huge leaps forward because you can leverage these engines to analyze complex policy
Hmm.
documents, complex written documents, big user manuals, all that stuff. We just dissolve that like a huge ice cube into a nice cup
Hmm.
of tea. What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. And you bring up an interesting point about going from regular analytics to AI. Reminds me of my early days when I was at Tableau, where we would work with customers that couldn't afford business objects, TM1, Cognos, or what
Right.
have you. So they would have gone from Excel spreadsheets and they essentially leapfrogged over legacy BI going into self-service analytics. And I'm quite sure the same thing with Spotfire and Click and other
Hmm.
companies of their ilk of those days. Um, but you're not going to be able to leapfrog over analytics to get to AI
Hmm.
because the it's almost like you need to double down on the analytics in your data strategy, or I should say, executing your data strategy before being very effective with AI. Because if
Hmm.
that structured data is not in good shape, doesn't have good semantic models, does not have the
Right.
data as a product aspect with data governance, you're you're going to have a hard time because there's going to be nuance and ambiguity where there really shouldn't be. And
Right.
I think that's one of the things that it makes it really easy for LLMs to hallucinate.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Well, folks, we'll pick that up after the break. We'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, back here on DM Radio, talking to Michael Kravec of Blue Yeti. They are a consultancy that focuses on the snowflake environment. You got to have some snow angle like avalanche and blizzard and all that kind of fun stuff. And I'm up here in Pittsburgh, so we know all about winter. We know all about cold. I'm not a
Mhm.
big fan, not going to lie. Looking to get back to Austin, Texas someday, or maybe New Orleans or Florida. I don't know. Somewhere in the South. But we're talking today about AI and automation and Gen AI, which of course does hallucinate. It is probabilistic in nature, and that's because it takes text and converts it to vectors and then converts vectors back to text. So it's a bit of a lossy process. So I think the key, Michael, we were chatting about this in the break just a moment ago, is that structured data is going to be crucial for valuable use of Gen AI because structured data is going to give you the numbers that matter, and it's also going to give you the semantics, the ontologies, if you will, the semantics of your business, not even just your industry, but your specific business that can be pulled from your unstructured data and leveraged along with your structured data to help business people understand and to help the models get the answers right. What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think the reason for that is um, when you look at the human in the loop, even going back before that was a real term in analytics, the human was the loop, right?
Right. That's funny.
And
That's a quote.
there's there's a lot of context, mini decisions that occur, and especially if it was self-service analytics, people were driving toward the context as they were doing their analysis. And what Gen AI is doing is again putting that context in the beginning. A lot more needs to be there in order for you to be successful with AI, and that requires that the context of the data needs to be self-evident so that the models are able to operate on them. And that self-evidency, if that is a word, requires the ontologies, the semantics, and the data governance, the consistency and the clarity of what the data is.
Right.
We all talk about data governance as just trust in data. Um, Kind of begs the question, what does trust mean? And I
Yeah.
typically, I mean, that winds up being, that could be, a whole other discussion in and of itself. And I know you've had shows about them, so I won't kind of go
Yeah.
too far into it. But,
Right.
uh, the matter of trust is just the reduction of risk. And like, what are those risks that that company is looking to mitigate?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think one of the challenges here that we're all facing is that these engines are so good at spinning up prose that you think they're sentient, and they're not sentient.
No.
Like they're just pattern
Mhm.
recognition engines that are reflecting patterns they've seen, they've been trained on
Mhm.
in conjunction with your prompt. So they're just reflecting back words and patterns that they've been trained on over time, which
Mhm.
is not the same thing as being sentient, and I don't think it ever will be. People are still talking about
Right.
AGI. I don't, I don't really see that happening, but I do see machines getting smarter. That said, when you talked earlier about how much context can be absorbed by these engines, it's really too much. And that's why these RAG models or fine tuning, if you want to do fine tuning instead, which is basically just including new layers in your deep learning module, basically, that's what it boils down to. So it's accomplishing the same thing in a slightly different way. And I'm guessing that to do fine tuning is a little bit more sophisticated than doing your RAG model. And there are lots and lots of tools coming out there for RAG models where you get your vector database, you train
Mhm.
it on your enterprise corporate data, and that's sort of a grounding for the large language model. But the point is, if you don't have good semantics, you're jeopardizing the quality of the answers that you're going to get, right?
Absolutely. Because when it comes down to enterprise Gen AI, it is really getting to the truth, getting to quantitative conclusions as fast as possible,
Mm-hmm.
and then potentially taking that and using it as some form of a competitive advantage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the key, right? And I think that, we're at a very fun and interesting time now in our industry because it's almost like it's circling around on itself, and we can now leverage all of what has been
Mhm.
before. And this gets me to a topic I think is kind of interesting, knowledge management. You look about as old as me, so you remember the knowledge management days when there was a
Uh,
great deal of enthusiasm about it, and it never really took off, I think, because we didn't have the compute power, we didn't
mhm.
really have the data structures and the
Mhm.
sophistication of the technology or even the methods and the methodologies. But now we're there. And I think this is a renaissance for actual knowledge management. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. One of the challenges in the past was usually the knowledge management systems were either excel at putting data in the system or taking data out.
Right.
And it's almost like the OLTP OLAP dichotomy, where
Mm-hmm.
it's either inserts or selects. And it was very difficult to find systems that could do both really well,
Hmm.
you
Interesting.
know. And I think the one making RAG models aware of data and new information as it's coming about and retraining and closing that loop as fast as possible is what is going to make people just work a lot more effectively. Because how many times have you just forgotten something
Right.
and that just slightly changed how you were going to do your results?
Right.
So the these agents are just able to take all of that in consideration. um and thankfully, at least from my experience on it, where they're getting things wrong have become more and more trivial. I mean, there's still
Interesting.
incorrectness to it, but it's not like you're completely, it's not like they completely missed the boat.
Right. That's very interesting. And so here's the big question in my mind for agentic AI. How do you monitor their behavior? First of all,
Mhm.
as a company I interviewed, Provoke Solutions, I think they have the right architecture where what they do is they've built NOAA is what they call it. It's like KNOVVA, I think is their
Okay.
solution. And what they do is they deploy it in your data center on a server, and you get your vector database. And the idea is that all the learnings will be in your environment on your server, not in the
Hmm.
cloud somewhere so someone else can access it. And of course, you can also use these multiple models to protect against PII being
Hmm.
stolen or intellectual property, where it's like you have one model that will find the signal in the PII or in your data, and that's in your data center, and then it'll go to the large language model with an abstraction of your problem. So the example that he gave, this is Alex Gallego from Red Panda, which I thought was very interesting. He said, take for example credit card fraud. I have a credit card. I made 5 purchases in San Jose within a 2-hour period, and then I made one in Stuttgart, Germany. 20 minutes later, looks a little strange. Like, why is
Right.
that happening? And his point is, you don't have to load that data into the LLM. You can just load the pattern of the data into the LLM and get some response. They'll say, yeah, that doesn't look good. Let's go ahead and flag that one for attention. So
Hmm.
where I'm driving at with this whole thread here is that you you want to have your control over your environment, and you want to
Hmm.
protect your intellectual property so that you can use these large language models in a safe and responsible manner. And I think that's the key, right? Is you have to think through what you're giving it and how you're giving it
Hmm.
that information. And as long as you abstract it away, you should be safe. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I would beg to differ on the it must be on-prem because we're doing something similar in the Snowflake ecosystem. We're partnered with a company called Genesis Computing that does agentic AI within Snowflake, within Snowpark, within the compute
Wow.
layer of
Wow.
Snowflake.
Wow.
Uh, Snowflake is housing the LLMs. They even have what DeepSeek's version in it now. They're keeping up to date with that, and that's really turning into the utility part of AI.
Hmm.
Uh, so the whole thing that you were talking about of having everything safe within the Snowflake VPC is exactly true.
Interesting.
And the interest, and that's what we're doing with the example of Telium that I was speaking about. We're also working with other partners for solutions as well, because that's since Snowflake has become such a um, large platform, a lot of other SaaS platforms are working with them. So, the
Right.
idea is we have two SaaS platforms that have already been approved. The design
Right.
pattern for the
Right.
cloud architects have already been worked out. The risks have been mitigated. Why open all that up again by saying I need
Right.
to do API calls out to, and pick your LLM your model that you wanted to go against.
Right.
So
Right.
that keeps it smaller and also keeps it more production ready because we really try to focus on elegance and simplicity and trying to Rube Goldberg all of these things to be really clever about getting the best answers possible.
Hmm.
Sometimes is not as good as it's shaped up to be.
Yeah.
So, it becomes less reliable. You're maintaining all of these different systems, so updates may not be compatible. APIs
Right.
start changing, and now let's make it as tight of a circle as possible, so that you're able to affect change the safest way you can.
Yeah, well, the scientific method, right? I mean, I remember a couple years ago, there was this whole storyline evolving of, oh, data science teams aren't able to reproduce the same results. And I thought to myself, then you're probably not doing science. I mean, the
Right.
scientific method requires that you
Hmm.
very carefully manage the inputs, the processes, and
Hmm.
monitor the outputs and so forth. But again, these systems are unwieldy, and that's again part of the sort of gray area that LLMs introduce because they do hallucinate. So you got to have your grounding. I interviewed company Victara a few weeks ago, Amr Awadallah, in fact, who was a co-founder of Cloudera years ago.
Hmm.
He's now the founder of, or a founder at least, of Victara. They do something interesting where, and they are focused on RAG, on like deploying RAG models for companies. And the last part of their workflow is a whole separate model that steps in, looks at the inputs, looks at the outputs, and gives a final quality assurance check and says, okay, this is good, or maybe it's not good. I think that's a very clever approach to take, where you get it's just another set of eyes to look at something,
Hmm.
even though it's virtual eyes. But what do you think about that approach?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting approach. Really, it comes down to transparency. So as long as you can derive or have an idea of how those decisions were made by the agentic system,
Hmm.
is going to be able to provide some clarity and manageability of it.
Hmm.
The parallel with humans is, when somebody makes a decision and does something, sometimes you make bonehead decisions. I mean,
Right.
God knows I have.
Right. That's
There,
funny.
no one's looking at auditing your thought process. We just kind of shot by the hip then.
Right.
So I think having it, um, but you could ask me why did I do it that way, and I could have
Right.
given you some kind of answer.
Right.
So I think having that level of explainability and transparency is going to be the key. Uh, coming, I don't know of any governance um, methodologies that are handling it that way at this point, but I think it's just going to get to it's going to get to a point where um, you do have the ability to find out kind of where they're coming from.
Yeah, and to that point, I brought up the folks from Provoke in part because of their architecture, but in part because of what they do and what they say their AI agent does, which is it has what amounts to a log file. So every time
Hmm.
it does something, it
Hmm.
publishes a little link. I did this, I did that,
Hmm.
I did all these things, and that's typically how you've troubleshot systems, right? Is through log
Right.
files. And so when your agentic solutions are deployed, are you doing the same thing? Is there a sort of
Mhm.
trail of evidence of I did this, I did that?
Yeah, I mean, I would hope so. And the thing I would add there as well is what is the human aspect of the context that they provided.
Hmm.
So,
What
and that
goes
kind
in, right?
right, what goes
Exactly.
in. So that's um, kind of begs humans to get better at defining problem statements.
Yeah. Right.
Everyone is essentially going to be a little bit of a manager in the future because they're going to be managing agentic AI bots.
Right.
And that comes down to role clarity and all of the management topics that really people aren't looking at when they're talking about AI. But really, the big part of what goes in is not just the documents, and we can make sure that the documents are okay, non-copyrighted, or if it's
Hmm.
um, if it's synthetic data, that it actually has value. But but also where those requests come from.
Hmm. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, monitoring what goes in, that's
Mm-hmm.
going to be crucial. And I think that's a big part of your audit trail now is
Mm-hmm.
what did you put in there? What does the model
Mm-hmm.
look like? I mean, that's the other side of the equation here is that in highly regulated environments, you're going to have to dot your I's and cross your T's and
Oh,
be able to
absolutely.
explain people what you did and how you
Mm-hmm.
did it. And I think that's usually what a regulator is looking for is some
Mm-hmm.
process in place. Is the process adhered to? What happened here? What did you do about it? All those things. And that's what I love about all these modern information systems and even the cloud. And we'll pick this up in the next segment. But I remember watching and waiting for cloud to really take off in the enterprise. And it took about 10 years longer than I expected, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
But old habits die hard. And the cloud introduced a whole new layer of abstraction, a whole new layer of difficulty, but now it is full on and it's so much data is captured automatically. Who did what, when, which system touched which other one, all this observability stuff. And now with
Right.
GenAI, you can actually analyze it quickly. But folks, don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, back here on DM Radio, talking to Michael Kravec of Blue Yeti, a consultancy that focuses on the Snowflake environment, and they're doing cool stuff with agentic AI. And Michael, I'll throw this over to you. I remember like watching, it was probably 4 years, this was 3 years ago, maybe. I went to one of these conferences up in Detroit. It was an open source conference, and observability was everywhere. There all of a
Right.
sudden there's like 25 observability vendors. There's New Relic and Datadog, and these guys have been a bit more successful over the years. But there are all these other companies out there. I'm like, what is going on? Where's all this coming from? My theory is that Kubernetes opened up this giant can of worms. I mean, it does amazing things for distributing compute and being able to have these ephemeral containers that just spin
Mm-hmm.
up and do their thing and go away. But it's also like, whoa, what is it doing? And so you need some window into that. And I think that's where all the observability came from. And the irony I see, and it's a beautiful irony, is that just as things got so complex that I mean, you would not be able to look at all these log files and understand them. We
Mm-hmm.
get Gen AI. So we can
Right.
just dump it in there and say, hey, what the hell does this mean? Not that it
Mm-hmm.
gets it right all the time, but it'll get it right a lot of the time. What do you think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's when you make something easy, people are going to make a lot of it. What is it, Jablon's paradox?
Right.
And then,
That's right. I
the,
forgot about that.
generally the next step is, all right, now I've got all this stuff. What's happening with it? What do I need? What don't I need? What's good? What's rogue?
Right.
And
Right.
the funny thing is about observability, there's essentially an observability solution for every level of the OSI stack.
Mm,
And
right.
not a lot of people are sure which ones belong to which. So is it Datadog? Is it Observe? Is it Splunk?
Wow.
And they're all looking at different things, but it's still observability.
That's interesting.
And I'd even argue now with Gen AI, there's this cognitive level of the OSI stack that's going to really kind of happen, where you're going to need to have observability on top of that too.
That's very interesting. That's a very, very good point. And when you bring in that much complexity, that's again where I think you get back to centers of gravity and
Hmm.
doing it,
Yes.
with partners instead of trying to roll your own, man. I mean, just to give a personal bit of context here, I remember a long time ago in the late 1990s, I was learning HTML and doing
Right.
web pages in like 1997 and 1998. It really kind of took off. And back then, I remember trying to learn a little bit of JavaScript, and I thought to myself, man, if you're going to do this, you need to really focus on this and not do anything else. And I didn't really want to do coding all day long. So I'm like, you know what?
Hmm.
I'm not going to go down this road. I'm going to focus on communications and writing and
Hmm.
media and that kind of stuff and let some of the other professionals do the coding. And wow, I mean, it is now so much more complex. I mean, when you start digging into how these large language models work, it's just absolutely mind blowing. So it is
Hmm.
important to know what are like, where do you specialize in your company? What can you focus on and do really well? Understanding that there are all these other players in the ecosystem. Yes, it costs money to go with Snowflake or Databricks or whatever, but still, you have to understand if you try to do this yourself, man, whoa, you're going to be in some pretty hot water pretty quickly, right?
Um, I, yeah, I think so. It's either I don't think it's categorically going to be hot water, but you are really adopting the free puppies when you're taking this on for yourself.
The free
And,
puppies.
right, and it sounds like it's
That's good.
and open not to trash open source, but open source almost makes that seem a little easier. It just kind of brings you in
Hmm.
because it's free and a lot of people are putting it together and it's always being kept up to date and it's on the cutting edge and you're going to be part of that community. But also, is that really going to be your job function too? Is that what your
Right.
primary job function? Is that what it should
Right.
be?
Right.
And if the enterprise that you're at is committed to software development, fantastic. But not a lot of companies that are they're focusing on products or other kinds of services. The nuts and bolts are really secondary. So it's important to keep that goal in mind, like the business value goal, and then
Hmm.
find out what is the simplest, what is the most effective way to do it.
Hmm.
Um, Simplicity isn't easy. It's the distillation of the complex. I
Hmm.
would even argue the other way you can look at it is you can truncate the complex to make it simple, but that's just cutting all the corner cases out and you have a really basic MVP,
Wow. That's a really
or
good way to put at it. Yeah, that's really a good
yeah,
way to
but
put it.
if you distill the complexity, it really takes into consideration all of the complexities, the nuances, and it's able to handle them elegantly. And that's hard to do.
Hmm.
I mean,
That's a really good point. Yeah,
yeah,
because
for
you
my
can have.
background, yeah, my background was from engineering, and I would see these uh, old engineers. Usually, they were mechanical engineers, and they'd come up with this really simple thing. And you'd look at it, and we back when I was doing some machine design too, we tried to go to a machine shop to get them made, but they were so elegantly done, we couldn't get a manufacturer in the United States to build them,
Wow.
just because it was so hard to do.
Hmm.
Again, simplicity is not easy. I'm
Right.
sorry, I think I stepped on you. Go ahead.
No, no, no. That's a good point, and I like the way you describe what happens when you truncate complexity. It's like you're cutting out the edge cases. I mean, I'll give you a quote from one of my best friends in the business, a guy Mark Madsen, who was been an independent analyst for years. He was at Teradata for a while. He's back independent now, but he told me a number of years ago. He said, if you design a new database, it'll take you 10 years to find the edge case that'll crash it, right? And I was like, wow, it might be
Hmm.
down to 5 years now or 4 years. The point is, it's a long time. Like these
Hmm.
systems are very, very complex. And when you're running in production in the enterprise, you can't have stuff breaking all the time. I mean, stuff does break all the time, obviously, which is what maintenance is all about. But to your point
Right.
earlier, if you try to roll your own, you're going to be putting out fires all day and all night. And is that really what you want to be doing? In your notes when you sent me this email before the show, you referenced Hadoop, and I remember the
Yeah.
whole Hadoop ecosystem thing,
Uh-huh.
and the amount of excitement around it was crazy. Right, I
Mm-hmm.
remember when Cloudera got $740 million, which back then was a
Yeah.
lot of money, for like a
Right.
16% share, and we're all like, "Holy Christmas, what's going on here?"
Right.
And then what did you see? You had like five, six, seven different distros of HDFS before
Mm-hmm.
the world said, "What are we doing? This is
Well, that was,
crazy."
yeah. I mean, thanks for bringing that up. I forgot about that. Hadoop was a prime example of really having the promise of performance. And I see parallels with Gen AI and RAG and all the different techniques that are coming.
Hmm.
Um, there are a lot of people with developer minds that chase after that. And it's exciting.
Hmm.
I mean, I've optimizing things and making things work better, and you're looking at it like a puzzle. But, at the end of the day, you still need to make sure the company makes money. You're providing value. You're not creating
Right.
downtime. And I think unless we figure out how to solve that problem in Gen AI, it could fall to the wayside, just like Hadoop has, essentially.
Right.
I
Right.
don't think it's going to, because
Right.
there's such a, not even a promise of performance or functionality. Um, there's a groove there happening, and we just need to, make sure that that is um, beyond the point of human error,
Hmm.
not perfection, but beyond the point of human error. And it'll be something that we're going to wind up seeing more and more of in customer facing use cases. Um, Whether or not when you're shopping, you can get very detailed and specific recommendations, or you're doing customer service, they can solve your problems a lot easier,
Yeah.
things of that nature.
Yeah. And I think you're right, and I think that probably in the next year or two, we're going to start seeing many, many more customer facing use cases. Right now, it's still largely decision support, which makes a lot of
Mhm.
sense. You mentioned human in the loop. The human is
Mhm.
still in the loop. Any decision support functionality has a human in the loop because it's just
Right.
supporting you. And I think that's
Right.
a really good way to look at these co-pilots is they are there to support you. They're there to help you. They're very good at lots of different things. They're very good at anything that's been widely published because they're really consensus engines, right? That's what these large language models are because of how they work, because of the
Right.
fact that they vectorize text and patterns of text into, mathematical formulae. And then in your vector database, that's all sort of stored in a spatial way where every
Mhm.
reference of dog is over here, cat is over here. Now there are
Right.
different patterns around that, but gosh, when you look at the results that you get, it's hard to believe that it's just predicting the next token. But from
Mhm.
what I've heard from people way on the inside, like, nope, that's still what it's doing. It's just
Right.
predicting
Yeah.
the next token. It's just like, how does it
Yeah.
do that?
That's
But
still the
we got
go.
another break coming up here real quick. But folks, look this gentleman up online, Michael Kravec. I'm sorry, Kravec of Blue Yeti. We are booking out the next quarter of shows, so feel free to reach out to yours truly, info@dmradio.biz as we explore what's happening. And we'll have a podcast bonus segment coming up next. If you want to check out all these archives, go to dmradio.biz. We store them all there. And like I say, send me an email, info@dmradio.biz if you want to be on the show. We'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, time for the podcast bonus segment here on DM Radio. Eric Kavanaugh here with Michael Kravec of Blue Yeti. We've been talking all about AI and automation. I mean, we've kind of been implying automation throughout here, but that's really what AI agents do is they automate stuff. Like you give it a task, it's declarative in nature. So you say,
Mhm.
hey, I want this done. I want clean data from some system to make a decision about which object to purchase next, and you just set the little guy off on his way, and he just runs some numbers and does some things. And it's very, very interesting. I mean, I'm actually curious to understand the difference between solvers and sort of declarative technology for AI agents because it sounds kind of similar. They're doing something similar. But I'll throw this quote from Jensen Huang at you, which blew my mind. He said, of course, of NVIDIA, he said, in the future, IT teams are going to be like HR teams for AI agents, which is funny.
Mhm.
But, they do need training. They do need guidance. And the good news is they won't, like throw up their hands and walk out the door and leave. They're not going to do that. At least I don't think they
Not
will, but
not yet.
hopefully they won't. Yeah, but what do you think about that quote? I think that's just
I think
remarkable.
I think it's a great quote, and it kind of reminds me of what I was saying before, how everyone's going to wind up being a little bit of a manager
Hmm.
for their AI agents. And it's like you have at this point, it's like you have a junior employee, maybe some,
Right.
maybe an entry level person. So you really
Right.
need to put the confines, again, that's really context of what the problem statement is. What do they need to do? What am I expecting? What are the expectations? What's the role clarity? And I think as time goes on, the agentic part is going to become more sophisticated. Right now we're doing things like creating marketing programs, suggesting what they should be, maybe executing them. It really comes down to what are the API capabilities of these systems.
Right.
That's the limitation. And
Hmm.
then after that is just testing and consistency.
That's
So,
wild.
yeah. And, just kind of talking about the example before of, I think we were talking about this before on one of the breaks where our AI note takers are, creating little action lists and everything. We're
Right.
not too far away where they would send the email out in your stead. Here, just check
Right.
this out and hit approve and let it go out. And think about the time savings that that has. And I think that just enables us to do a lot more. So we're going to
Hmm.
just start seeing an acceleration of growth and productivity that's just going to make everybody a lot more effective. But
Right.
that's going to be predicated on being the HR for the or IT being the HR for bots.
Right.
There's certainly going to be an aspect of that.
Yeah. Well, I'll throw one last comment at you and get your feedback. I did a webinar, I don't know, a couple months ago, I guess, of predictions where are things going in the AI world. And I sat around and thought about this for a long time, and I realized, I think what you're going to see in the fairly near future are engines like Salesforce will be one, Amazon will have its own. The
Mhm.
big centers of gravity will build these things, and they will be automation engines for just about everything in your business. Meaning, you'll log on to X vendor, let's say, okay, I want to launch a retail company, and it'll just ask you some questions, and you'll answer the
Mhm.
questions, and then it'll actually register your company. It'll give you an
Mhm.
email address. It'll do all these like really boring admin things that no one
All
likes
right.
to do anyway. And it'll
Mm-hmm.
spin up your business. And then it'll just start sending you suggestions. You give it your credit card, of course, you got to pay for it. It's going to
Sure.
say, all right, do you want to run a Google Ads campaign or a
Mm-hmm.
Facebook campaign or what? I go, okay, I want to do this. And you'll basically be in the driver's seat responding to prompts. Like now we're the ones prompting the systems. I think in the future, business models, you'll have these engines that will prompt you and say, hey, do you want to do this? Do you want to do
Mm-hmm.
that? And they'll learn from you and they'll be able to gauge the efficacy too, because they'll see,
Sure.
okay, this campaign worked, that campaign didn't work. I mean, that
Mm-hmm.
is a remarkable transformation where all of a sudden we're just guiding through approvals or disapprovals what the engine comes up with on its own. How feasible is that, do you think?
I think it's very feasible. I mean, one of the things that we've done now with Telium is almost getting to that point where we're asking the bots the question of, I have this kind of business and I'm looking to attract this certain demographic. And then they know, well, you should run these types of campaigns because they're the ones that pay attention to it, social
Right.
media, going to apps, so on and so forth. They don't go out and actually create them and run them just yet because that's going to cost money and you're going to want that's when you want the human in the loop right now.
Right.
But it's very we're very very close to doing exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. And that's just so wild. But you make an excellent
Mhm.
point, which is there can be, think about the infinite loop from the old days of programming, right? Line 10, print hello. Line
All right.
20, go to line
Go
10.
to 10.
Like enter. Like,
Yeah. Right,
oh, turn it
exactly.
off. You can't turn that thing off.
Hmm.
There will be, I mean, this happens already, right? This happens where
Yeah.
pods just like, they just spring up and you're like, oh, what the
Hmm.
hell's happening? Kill that pod. That's what they do basically.
Hmm.
Just kill the
I
pod. Um, and so you will need humans to sit there and watch
Mhm.
it because if all of a sudden your spend starts going up like this, whoa, kill that sucker. What is it doing?
That
That's going
reminds
to be the
me
future, right?
that yeah, that reminds me of, you're talking about the infinite loop. I had done one in an Excel VBA macro where it actually the one mistake was it replicated a copy of itself.
Oh,
So it geometrically grew and kept running and self-replicating and just would blow up the computer. But but I think a lot of the agentic AI is going to democratize efficiency. And one
hmm,
of the things, the Amazons, the Walmarts are world class at what is a supply chain. Some
right,
others are on pricing. Some of them are
right,
customer contact. This is going to be able to have people, small organizations, small entities, actually be able to carve their little section of the industry and become highly efficient and highly effective at it and become world
right.
class at it, which I think is really exciting.
And that's ecosystem, right? So that's I was kind of hinting at that earlier, but I think you're exactly correct. That you got to understand what you do well, what do you want to do, and this is my call out to human beings everywhere.
Right?
What do you really enjoy doing day to day? What could you do every day and have a good time doing and still make money? That's what you got to figure out because, toiling away, doing boring things, I mean, a lot of that is going to go away. Now there will always be management and shepherding and
Mhm.
dealing with the puppies. I love
Right.
that puppies. That's I'm going to use that one, man. That's funny. But anyway, closing thoughts from you.
No, like I said, this is a really interesting time. Coming from similar vintage of you going through the analytics evolution, where this is going to be a step change in being able to get things done, being
Yeah,
able to come to the right conclusions, make the right decisions, and soon be able to automatically do the right actions. And
I
actually, we're
love it.
already doing that today.
I love it. Well, look him up online, folks. Michael Kravec. That's Kravec of Blue
Yeah.
Yeti. We'll talk to you next time, folks. You've been listening to DM Radio.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.